Trust isn't just a luxury, it's the foundation on which every modern society sits upon, and when it crumbles, everything begins to fall apart. Let's take an example of what's happening in the US. Let's take a look at three different things. Number one in 5 American is under medical debt. That shows that their healthcare system is no longer working. Number two, the economy is no longer functioning well. In 2023, there was an increase in 12% homelessness, while simultaneously a 36% increase in the wealth of billionaires. Well, we know who the economy is serving, right? And the third thing is that when all of these problems are there, it breeds into political violence. And we saw what happened in the unprecedented Capitol riots, which resulted in 5 deaths and numerous injuries. All of this shows a declining trust in the society and shows that the society is breaking apart. Well, in this video, we're going to learn why trust is so important, what happens when it goes away, and what are the key things which actually destroy it. So let's start. Why is trust so important for a society? Well, according to Francis Fukushima in his book Trust, the Social Virtue and the Creation of Prosperity, there are actually 2 types of societies. The first one is a high trust society and the second one is a low trust society. In a high trust society, people can trust each other. They can transcend their family and tribal bonds and have greater cooperation. This leads to greater political stability, more economic stability, and more prosperity in that society. Whereas in a low trust society, people are unable to trust one another. This leads to bad politics, this leads to poor economy and a society which is not as prosperous. To better understand all of this, let's actually take a look at some real example of high trust societies and low trust societies and see how it actually pans out in real life. And let's also link it up with some modern examples and with some fresh survey data from some world famous organizations and see what we can learn from all of this. First, let's take a look of high trust societies like post-industrial England and the United States. In both of these societies, people were able to transcend their family and close-knit groups and foster great level of trust. There were 2 factors which contributed to this growth in trust. The first thing was their cultural values. Both of them had Protestant values or ethics or whatever, which taught them that they need to be good, kind, and fair to each other, which helped to foster a greater level of trust, and people naturally felt a bit guilty about doing like crime, like being dishonest or breaking their deals. And the second factor was their legal framework, which gave strong protection to businesses in case of dispute. They had rule of law, which meant that cases could be filed and justice could be served, and they also had different companies laws and protection. For example, in the US, they had strong property laws and they also had enforceable contracts, while in England they had the Joint Stock Companies Act 1844, which allowed businesses to form partnerships and also gave them many protections. The impact of both of these factors were phenomenal for both of these societies. People were able to trust strangers, and it led to great growth during the Industrial Revolution in both of these countries, which totally transformed them fully. It also helped businesses to expand in those companies. It also helped innovation to thrive and societies to flourish. Now let's look at the other side of the coin, which are the low trust societies. Once again, I will be looking at 2 different countries. The first is an area in Italy, which is the southern region of Italy, and the second is pre-modern China. In both of these areas, our society's trust was limited. In southern Italy, there's a phenomena called amoral familism, which means that people trust their immediate family members a lot, but they are more mistrustful of people who are outside their family. What this meant for businesses is that most of the businesses became family run, and large scale or business cooperation or partnership became less common. And southern Italy actually lagged behind of northern Italy, and it did not develop as much compared to northern Italy because of the low trust factor. Now coming to pre-modern China. In pre-modern China, you had merchants which mostly did trade in their family or within their clan. This meant that their trade networks became more localized and largest cooperation was not possible or achieved. The end result in both of these societies is that their economies lagged behind and they missed growth and innovation opportunities because of their low trust. So let's move on forward. Modern data actually backs up this claim. Let's take an example of two different countries or societies. We'll take a look at Norway and we'll take a look at Nigeria. Norway is a high trust society. Around 73% people say that they trust each other. Let's take a look at their GDP per capita. Well, 75,000. What type of life they have? Well, they have a very good welfare system. It has strong institutions, robust economy, and a very good quality of life. Now let's take an example of a low trust society, Nigeria. In Nigeria, only 25% of the people say that they can trust each other. What's their GDP per capita? It's $2,100. And what type of life they have? Well, they have economic hardships, they have weak institutions, and overall the quality of life is not that great. So what's the key takeaway over here? Well, if you have high trust societies, it leads to greater cooperation, which means stronger institutions, which means a stronger economy, which means better quality of life. When you have low trust society, you have poor cooperation, which leads to weak institutions, which leads to weaker economy, and which leads to poor quality of life. So that's how trust impacts societies and is so crucial for their health and their well-being. Now let's take a look at factors which erode trust in a society. The most important one which I have researched so far seems to be perceived systematic unfairness. Over here, what happens is that person or individual or the people that live in the society, they feel whole system is being unfair to them. It could be political unfairness, social unfairness, or economic unfairness. The first one could be due to marginalization of certain voices, certain point of views, or certain ways of life. The second one could be due to racial tensions or class divide, and the third one would be due to economic disparity. People just being stuck, being poor, and unable to have a better life. When people think that they are treated unfairly by the systems that run their society, they feel a lot of resentment in their heart, and that erodes their trust in the whole system, and they start to mistrust each other and mistrust their institutions. So now let's take a look at two different protests which happen in the UK, which illustrate this phenomena very well, which represent the different ends of the political spectrum inside the UK. Let's take a look at the first of these protests, which happened in 2011 when there was a police shooting of a guy called Mark Dugan. Initially, people were trying to protest about that thing, but then it suddenly turned into a mass looting campaign, and for many days London and other cities just burned. There seemed to be no laws at work, and people were just robbing shops and trying to get anything they want. They just grab a TV or just grab their favorite shoes, or it could be anything at all. However, once you actually ask those people why they were protesting, they had some very interesting things to say. Let's take a look at this person, what he has to say. I wasn't there for robbing, I was there for revenge. I'll always remember the day that we had the police and government scared. For once, they were living on the edge. They felt how we felt. They felt threatened by us. So as you can see from their statements, they seem really angry. They feel like they have been the one who have been mistreated by police. Why did they feel that way? Well, there were three different factors why they felt that way. The first case was the police stop and search policy, which was targeting more at these ethnically diverse neighborhoods. The second thing is that these people felt that the system was working for the other side of the society, for the wealthier side of the society, and they were economically worse off, or they felt that economically they had no hope. They felt that the system was rigged against them. So that was the news article. Let's see what a research paper had to say. The evidence suggests writers were generally poorer than the country at large. 59% of the England writers came from the most deprived 20% areas in the UK. Let's go on ahead. It says writers identified a number of other motivating grievances, from the increase in tuition fees to the closure of youth clubs, blah blah blah. Many complained about the perceived social and economic injustices. This is the point which I really want you to note over here. So these people basically felt excluded by the system. They felt like the system was mistreating them, and in a way they vented out their frustration and anger in a very negative way by looting and by doing all of those things, but in their mind they were the ones who were the victims. This is something which I want you to keep in your mind over here. Now let's take a look at some other protests which happened in the UK, which is the 2024 protest. The 2024 protest in the UK started when there was murder of 3 young girls, and there was fake news on Twitter that it was some immigrant Muslim probably that did that crime. And then there was a massive backlash of mostly white working people in the UK who took part in these massive protests against the government, and they felt like their country was being overrun by these immigrants who were destroying their norms, destroying their values, and just destroying their whole sense of identity, and they felt like they were also bringing crime with them. Now let's take a look at one of the news example of this event as well. So if I go down over here, so what do these protesters have to say? So they say things like enough is enough, save our kids, stop the boats. Robinson said his rally was to unify the UK, adding, today the people of Britain will send a message to the world. We will remain silent no longer. We want our country back. In this second protest, the people felt like the government or a system was treating them unfairly because it was not protecting their norms, their values, and their national identity. They felt all of that was at stake, and they also felt like there was added problem of crime or these other problems that they perceived existed, which made them give such a strong backlash, even though the news was fake in this case over here. Regardless of these two very big protests over here, what's really important is that in both of these protests, a very different side of that country protested, probably kind of against each other, but both of them actually felt mistreated or unfairly treated by the very same system, and they felt like the system mistreated them against the other group and gave one group the upper hand, while the other felt the exact same thing but in the reverse order, which is so interesting for me to observe. The key thing to note is that in both of these protests there is a shared feeling of systematic unfairness. The reasons why one side feel that the system is treating them unfairly is totally different. However, the feeling is there of systematic unfairness. Because that feeling exists, because they think that the system is against them, their trust in the whole system and in the society begins to erode away, and that's how the trust declines in their society, which is England in this case. So which is very interesting, and these two examples show that even if you are on the different end of a political spectrum, you might still feel a perceived unfairness against you by your system for the other group, while the other group would feel the exact same thing towards you. Both simultaneously actually feel the same thing, which is very interesting. That's how the trust erodes in a society and things weaken. In order to solve these issues, which is totally out of the scope of this video, maybe it should be a totally different video on its own, but to very briefly give remark, I think instead of seeing both sides as totally wrong, evil, and unacceptable, it's really important in democracies to actually accept the other side, whether you like them or you dislike them. You need to acknowledge them and their issues or their grievances. So whether it's the far right or you have people of diverse backgrounds or diverse ethnicities trying to loot different shops, you need to understand where their resentments are coming from and actually solve those issues. So for example, in this far right protest or this nationalistic protest, they're worried that their culture is under threat. They're worried that their identity is under threat, and they're worried that maybe the immigrants taking away their jobs or creating law and order problems. You need to solve those issues, whether those issues are real or unreal. In their minds, the perception of those issues exists. Similarly, in this other side as well, they also feel excluded by the society. They feel like maybe they are treated as second-class citizens, or they also feel like police is being extra harsh or strict on them. Whether that is real or fake, but the perception in their mind exists. You actually need to resolve those perceptions, which can be real or fake. I haven't done enough more research to go really dig deep into them, but I do think that there's a solution for these problems, but that's totally beyond the scope of this video. Now let's move on to the next factor which really erodes trust, and that is corruption and the lack of accountability. In order to explain this topic, I really want to go into US history, and let's take a look at a trust graph at a time when people had very high trust in the US government, and in this 10 years time frame there's a massive drop in the level of trust which people had in their government. So what happened? Why did trust suddenly fell so low? Well, there were three things which happened during this time. The first thing was the Vietnam War, the second thing was the civil rights unrest, and the third thing was the Watergate scandal. In each of these things, the people at the top, the government and the other institutions, they really got exposed, and people saw that a lot of bad stuff was happening, and there was no accountability for it, and that made them lose their interest, and there was such a sharp decline in that interest. In the first case, for the Vietnam War, so the Vietnam War was really long and unpopular. People did not like it. What even made it worse was that there was a leak of Pentagon papers in 1971. It showed that the US leaders had systematically lied to public and Congress about the war's progress and objectives. They said they were winning the war, but in reality the losses were high and the war was in stalemate. So a big bummer for the public. The second thing is that in 1960s and 1970s there was a lot of unrest against systematic inequality and social injustice. So there was a lot of violent crackdown on these protests, and there was even an incident when a National Guard fired at unarmed students, and all of this created resentment in that community that they were being suppressed by the system, which were the black people in this case. The third thing is the Watergate scandal. So what happened this time was that the president Richard Nixon was involved in high-profile corruption, and there was this case of breaking in the Democratic Committee and just robbing and getting some hush money like $25,000, and then trying to use the state agencies to cover that up, which was pretty bad. He had to resign and leave office. But it showed that on such a high level, your own president and even the federal agencies were involved in this cover-up of this big corruption. So these three things which happened during this 10 years time really damaged the trust that the Americans had in their system, in their government. Okay, so that concludes our factors on how trust can erode in a society. There are actually many other factors as well, but I think these two are really important, especially the first one. That's why I covered it in more detail. A quick recap: we first understood why trust is important, then we understood what happens in a society when trust is very low. We saw they don't really do well in terms of political stability, nor they do well in terms of economic stability, and then we also looked at what are the key factors which actually erode trust in a modern society. In the next future video, I actually would be covering how societies can collapse due to a completely new reason, which is the rise of the modern technology itself. I believe that at the pace how humanity is evolving and at the pace how technology has evolved, we as humans no longer can keep up with all of the latest changes. We might actually go extinct due to that. Stay tuned, and if you can see that video here, you can click on it and watch it, and please like, subscribe, and please comment, and I will definitely reply back to you. And I'm still pretty new to this YouTube thingy, so every subscriber definitely counts. So your support truly means the world to me. See you next time. Take care.